Sometimes the loneliest people are the ones who once had everything to fight for. Sometimes a single moment of kindness can change two lives forever. Torvald was a Viking warrior whose name once echoed across battlefields. Now he lives alone in a snow-covered longhouse, his fighting days behind him, his heart grown cold as the winter around him. One frozen evening, he hears a faint sound at his wooden gate. A woman lies collapsed in the snow, shivering and barely alive. She whispers words he can barely hear. "I can't move." He carries her inside, not knowing who she is or what brought her to his door. But as she recovers by his fire, something begins to stir in both of them. What secret was she running from? And would it force this old warrior to pick up his blade one final time? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fjord had not always been so quiet. There was a time, many winters ago, when the water below Torvald's longhouse had carried longships painted with serpents and shields, when the air rang with the laughter of warriors and the songs of skalds. Back then, the settlement along the shore had been alive with purpose, with families who raised children and tended animals, with blacksmiths whose hammers sang from dawn until dusk. Torvald remembered those days the way a man remembers a dream, vividly in some moments, hazily in others, but always with the knowledge that it could never return. Now, the longhouse stood alone on the cliff's edge, its timber walls weathered grey by salt and wind. The carved dragon heads that once adorned the roofline had long since been taken down, their fierce faces unnecessary in a world where no enemies came calling anymore. The settlement below had emptied gradually, family by family, as younger men sought fortune in distant lands, and older ones followed their children to warmer, safer places. Torvald had watched them go one by one, until the day came when he stood at his gate and saw no smoke rising from any hearth but his own. He was 53 winters old, though his body felt older on cold mornings when his joints protested movement. His hair, once the color of wheat in summer, had gone silver-gray and hung to his shoulders in the old way. His beard was thick and shot through with white. And his hands, those hands that had gripped sword and axe through countless battles, were scarred and calloused, marked by a lifetime of violence and survival. He stood tall still, broad across the shoulders, but there was a heaviness to him now, a weariness that went deeper than muscle and bone. The longhouse itself was larger than one man needed. Its main hall stretched 30 paces from end to end, with a central hearth that had once warmed dozens of people during winter feasts. The walls were lined with sleeping benches, most of them bare now, their furs and blankets long since stored away. Above, the smoke hole in the roof let in a column of grey winter light that fell across the packed earth floor. At the far end of the hall, Torvald kept his bed, separated from the main space by a hanging curtain of wool. It was the only part of the longhouse he truly lived in anymore. His daily routine had become ritualized through repetition. He rose before dawn, as he had done since his days as a young warrior, and fed the fire that he never let die completely. He ate simply, dried fish, hard bread, sometimes a thin porridge if he felt ambitious. He tended to the few animals he kept, 3 chickens that gave him eggs, a goat that provided milk, and an old horse named Grani, who had carried him through his last battles and now spent his days in a small shelter beside the longhouse. These tasks filled his mornings. His afternoons were spent in maintenance and preparation. He chopped wood from the forest that climbed the hills behind his home, splitting logs with an axe whose handle he had replaced 3 times, but whose iron head was original, forged by a smith who had died 20 years past. He mended his roof when snow or wind damaged it. He checked his stores of food, counted his supplies, and planned for the seasons ahead. He fished from the rocks below when weather allowed, pulling cod and haddock from the cold fjord waters. He did what needed doing to survive another day, another week, another winter. But it was in the evenings, when the work was done and the fire burned low, that Torvald felt the weight of his solitude most keenly. He would sit on his bench beside the hearth, a cup of weak mead in his hand, and stare into the flames. Sometimes he would run a whetstone along the blade of his sword, not the axe he used for wood, but the weapon that had been his companion through years of raiding and warfare. The sword hung on the wall above his bed, within reach even in sleep. Though he had not drawn it in anger for more than a decade, the blade was called Bitter Steel, a name given by his shield brothers after a battle in the Irish lands, where he had fought for 3 days straight, refusing to yield even when wounded. He had been young then, barely 20, filled with the fire that drives young men to prove themselves. The sword had tasted the blood of Saxons and Franks, of rival Norse jarls and Irish chieftains. It had made him wealthy once, had earned him land and cattle and the respect of other warriors. It had also cost him more than he liked to remember. Torvald's wife had been named Astrid. She had been strong and clever, a woman who could spin wool and wield a knife with equal skill, who had borne him 2 children and managed his household while he was away raiding. Their daughter, Sigrid, had her mother's dark hair and sharp tongue. Their son, Bjorn, had been quieter, thoughtful, with a gift for woodworking that had seemed to promise a peaceful life. They had been his world, the reason he fought, the reason he returned from each voyage. Then came the sickness. It swept through the settlement 15 years ago, a fever that took the very young and the very old first, then began claiming others seemingly at random. Astrid fell ill while Torvald was away on what would be his final raid. By the time he returned, she was already in the ground. Sigrid had survived the fever, but followed a Danish trader north the next spring, seeking a new life away from the memories. Bjorn had lived until his 23rd winter, when a fishing accident in the fjord took him during a storm. Torvald had pulled his son's body from the water himself. After that, something in Torvald had simply stopped. He did not rage or weep or call out to the gods. He simply withdrew, like a snail pulling into its shell. He stopped going to the alehouse when other men gathered. He stopped joining the hunts in the hills. He stopped singing the old songs. His shield brothers tried to draw him out at first, but eventually they too gave up. One by one they moved away or died, and Torvald remained, alone in his longhouse on the cliff. His nearest neighbor now was Orm, a man 10 years younger who lived with his wife and 3 children, in a farmstead 2 hours' walk to the south. Orm came by perhaps once each month, bringing news from the wider world and checking that the old warrior had not frozen or starved. Torvald appreciated these visits more than he let on, though he never said so. Orm's eldest son, a boy of 12 named Haldor, sometimes accompanied his father and would sit wide-eyed as Torvald showed him how to sharpen a blade or mend leather. The boy reminded Torvald of Bjorn, which was both painful and strangely comforting. The village that served the scattered farms in the region lay a half-day's journey to the east, nestled in a sheltered valley where the wind was less brutal. Torvald went there perhaps 3 times a year to trade for things he could not make or grow himself: iron, salt, wool cloth. The villagers treated him with a mix of respect and caution. They knew his reputation, knew the stories of his fighting days, but they also saw him as a relic of a harder time, a ghost from an age that was passing away. The younger generation looked at him the way one might look at an old stone altar to gods nobody worshipped anymore. The Longhouse had one artifact that Torvald valued above all others, even above Bitter Steel. It hung beside the main door, impossible to miss as one entered. A round wooden shield, painted with a design of interlocking serpents in red and black. The paint had faded over the years, and the wood bore the scars of battle. Deep gouges where blades had struck, burn marks from fire arrows, a split along one edge that had been carefully repaired with iron bands. This shield had belonged to Torvald's father, Eric, who had carried it through his own years of raiding and warfare. Eric had given it to his son on the day Torvald joined his first raid, at the age of 16. "This shield has saved my life more times than I can count," Eric had said, his weathered face serious. "It has held against Saxon spears and Irish axes. It has caught arrows meant for my heart. But more than that, it carries the weight of our family honor." Every man who has carried this shield has brought it home. See that you do the same." Torvald had kept that promise. Through every battle, every storm at sea, every desperate fight in foreign lands, he had brought the shield home. When Eric died peacefully in his sleep, at the age of 67, Torvald had hung the shield beside the door of his longhouse as a testament to the man who had taught him everything about being a warrior and, more importantly, about being a man of honor. The shield represented something fundamental to Torvald's understanding of himself. It was a reminder of duty fulfilled, of promises kept, of a time when he had been part of something larger than himself. When he looked at it, he saw not just wood and paint and iron, but the faces of men he had fought beside, the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder, the sacred bond between warriors who trusted each other with their lives. It was the last tangible connection to the world he had known, before loss and time had stripped away everything else. On this particular evening, as winter deepened its grip on the land, Torvald sat beside his fire and felt the cold seeping through the walls, despite the flames. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the timbers, with a sound like sand being thrown against wood. He had eaten his evening meal, salted fish, and the last of the bread he had baked 3 days prior. His cup held mead that was more water than honey, but it was warm, and that was enough. He found himself thinking about his father, as he often did when the nights were long. Eric had been a hard man, as most warriors of his generation were, but he had also been fair and surprisingly gentle with his family. Torvald remembered his father teaching him to swim in the fjord during summer, holding him up in the cold water and laughing when the boy sputtered and complained. He remembered Eric's stories, told around fires just like this one, of distant lands and strange peoples, of battles won and friends lost. A man's life is measured not by the gold he accumulates or the enemies he defeats, Eric had once told him, late in life, when age had softened some of the old warrior's edges. It is measured by the people he protects, the promises he keeps, and the legacy he leaves. Everything else is just noise. Torvald wondered what his father would think of him now, a ghost living alone, his family gone, his sword gathering dust on the wall. Had he kept his promises? Had he protected those who mattered? He had tried, but in the end he had failed. The sickness had taken Astrid despite all his prayers. The storm had taken Bjorn despite all his searching. And Sigrid, wherever she was now in the Danish lands, was beyond his reach entirely. The fire crackled and popped, sending up sparks that danced toward the smoke hole. Torvald's eyelids grew heavy. He was considering whether to bank the fire and seek his bed when he heard it. A sound from outside, faint beneath the wind, but distinct enough to catch his attention. It was not the usual creak of wood or rattle of the gate in the storm. This was different. This was the sound of something falling or someone crying out. Torvald sat up straighter, listening. There it was again, a voice thin and desperate, barely audible over the wind. His warrior's instincts, dormant for so many years, suddenly flared to life. Someone was out there in the storm, at his gate. Without thinking, without even pausing to grab his cloak, Torvald rose from his bench and moved toward the door. His hand fell naturally to the handle of the sayax, the long knife he still kept at his belt, and he pulled open the heavy door. The cold struck him like a physical blow. Snow swirled in the darkness, driven nearly horizontal by the wind. He could see perhaps 10 paces ahead, no more. The wooden gate that marked the boundary of his property was just visible through the storm. And there, collapsed against it like a bundle of rags, was a figure in the snow. Torvald moved forward without hesitation, his boots crunching through the fresh drifts. As he drew closer, he could make out details. This was a woman, her clothing torn and inadequate for such weather, her dark hair plastered to her head with snow and ice. She was curled on her side, shaking violently, her lips moving though no sound emerged at first. He knelt beside her, his hands finding her shoulders. She was alive but barely, her skin cold as stone beneath his touch. Her eyes fluttered open, dark eyes wide with fear and pain, and focused on his face. Her lips moved again, and this time he heard the whisper, so faint it was almost lost in the wind. "I can't move," she breathed. And then her eyes rolled back and she went limp in his arms. Torvald did not think. He simply acted, his body remembering what his mind had tried to forget, how to move in crisis, how to prioritize survival over comfort, how to carry a wounded person without causing further harm. He slid his arms beneath the woman's body, one under her shoulders and one under her knees, and lifted her from the snow. She weighed almost nothing, her frame slight beneath the soaked and ragged clothing. Her head lolled against his chest as he turned back toward the Longhouse, moving as quickly as he dared through the deepening drifts. The wind tore at them both, and Torvald felt the cold biting through his tunic, now that his blood had stopped pumping quite so urgently. Each step was deliberate, careful. He could not afford to slip, not with this fragile burden in his arms. The woman's breathing was shallow and rapid, her body still shaking with violent tremors. He had seen this before, the final stages of freezing when the body begins to shut down from the inside out. If he did not warm her soon, she would die. He shouldered open the door to the Longhouse and kicked it shut behind him with his heel. The warmth of the fire hit him immediately, a sharp contrast to the frozen world outside. He carried the woman straight to the hearth and laid her down on the furs that covered his own sleeping bench, the closest warm surface to the flames. Her eyes remained closed, her face pale as fresh snow, except for the blue tinge around her lips. Torvald worked quickly, his hands steady, despite the urgency. He had tended wounded men before, had pulled comrades from icy water after ships capsized, had seen what cold could do to human flesh. First, he needed to remove the wet clothing. It would only continue to draw heat from her body. He cut away her outer layer with his sayax, a threadbare cloak that had offered almost no protection against the storm. Beneath it she wore a simple wool dress, also soaked through, and a torn undershirt. He removed these as well, trying to maintain what dignity he could, while recognizing that modesty mattered less than survival. Once she was bare, he wrapped her in dry furs from his own bed, piling them high around her body. He built up the fire, adding logs until the flames leaped high, and the heat radiated in waves across the hall. Then he heated water in his iron pot, adding herbs, yarrow and willow bark, that his mother had taught him could help with fever and pain. While the water heated, he rubbed the woman's hands and feet, trying to restore circulation to her extremities. Her fingers were like ice, and he feared that frostbite had already set in on at least 2 of her toes. As he worked, he studied her face properly for the first time. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 30 winters or a few more. Her features were fine-boned, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. Her dark hair, now beginning to dry in the warmth, fell in waves past her shoulders. Even unconscious and half-frozen, there was something striking about her, a quality he could not quite name. She wore a small leather cord around her neck, and from it hung a curious pendant, a flat piece of amber, roughly carved into the shape of a bird in flight. The pendant was warm to his touch, which surprised him, given how cold the rest of her had been. He left it around her neck, respecting whatever significance it held for her. Such tokens often carried meaning beyond their material value. Protection charms, family heirlooms, reminders of home. He understood the weight such objects could carry. Had he not kept his father's shield for exactly such reasons? When the herbal tea was ready, Torvald lifted the woman's head and tried to get some of the warm liquid between her lips. At first, it simply ran down her chin, but then her throat convulsed in a swallow, and she took a small amount. He gave her more, slowly, patiently, until perhaps half a cup had gone down. Then he laid her head back on the furs and settled in to wait. The hours passed slowly. Torvald maintained the fire, checked on the woman regularly, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Who was she? Where had she come from? The nearest settlement was half a day's journey away, far too distant for someone to travel on foot in such weather, especially dressed as poorly as she had been. Had she been running from something? Fleeing danger? The condition of her clothing suggested violence. The tears were too deliberate, too clean. as if someone had grabbed and ripped the fabric. He examined her more closely now, looking for injuries beyond the cold. There were bruises on her arms, purpling marks that looked like finger impressions where someone had gripped her hard. A scratch across her collarbone, not deep but fresh. Her knuckles were scraped raw. She had fought someone, or tried to. The realization settled in Torvald's gut like a stone. This woman had not simply gotten lost in the storm. She had been fleeing, and whoever she had been fleeing from might still be looking for her. The thought stirred something in Torvald that he had not felt in many years, a sense of protectiveness, of responsibility for another person's welfare. It was uncomfortable, this feeling, like putting on armor that no longer fit properly. He had spent so long caring only for his own survival, keeping his world small and manageable, that the sudden intrusion of another person's crisis felt almost overwhelming. Yet he could not simply turn away. His father's voice echoed in his memory. A man protects those who cannot protect themselves. That is what separates us from beasts. Torvald had lived by that code once, had built his reputation on it. Perhaps some part of him still believed it, buried beneath years of grief and isolation. Around midnight, the woman's trembling finally began to ease. Her breathing deepened, became more regular. The terrible blue tinge faded from her lips, replaced by a more natural pallor. Torvald allowed himself to believe that she would survive the night. He added more wood to the fire, pulled his own bench closer to the hearth, and wrapped himself in a spare fur. He would sleep here within reach in case she woke or took a turn for the worse, but sleep did not come easily. His mind churned with questions and concerns. What would he do with her once she recovered enough to speak? Send her back to wherever she had come from? Keep her here until the weather cleared? And what of the people she might have been running from? If they came looking, would he be expected to hand her over? Or could he defend her? His eyes drifted to bitter steel on the wall, the sword's blade catching the firelight. He had not drawn it in earnest for so long. The thought of doing so now filled him with a complicated mix of emotions, reluctance, certainly, but also something else. Something that might have been anticipation or purpose, or simply the old instincts of a warrior recognizing the approach of conflict. The woman stirred in her sleep. A small sound escaping her lips, not quite a word, more like a whimper of distress. Torvald leaned forward, watching her carefully. Her eyes moved beneath their lids, suggesting dreams or memories playing out in her unconscious mind. Whatever she was fleeing, it followed her even into sleep. He reached out and adjusted the furs around her shoulders, tucking them more securely. The gesture felt strange, intimate in a way that made him uncomfortable. He had not touched another person with such care since Astrid's final illness, when he had sat by her bedside and held her hand as the fever consumed her. The memory brought a sharp pain to his chest, and he withdrew his hand quickly. Outside, the storm continued to rage. The wind howled around the Longhouse, seeking entry through every crack and gap in the timbers. Snow piled against the walls and drifted across the doorstep. It would be days before the weather cleared enough for any kind of travel. For better or worse, this woman would be his responsibility until then. Torvald settled back on his bench and closed his eyes, though he kept his senses alert for any change in her condition. His hand rested on the hilt of his sayax, a habit from old battles when sleep was never deep and threats could emerge from the darkness at any moment. The amber pendant around the woman's neck seemed to glow faintly in the firelight, the carved bird appearing almost alive in the dancing shadows. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. But she was under his roof now, and by the old codes he still honored. That made her his responsibility. Whatever had driven her to his gate on this frozen night, whatever dangers pursued her, they would have to go through him first. The realization brought with it a strange sense of relief, as if a burden he had not known he was carrying had suddenly lifted. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Torvald had a purpose beyond simple survival. He had someone to protect. The fire crackled and settled. The woman breathed. The storm howled. And in his longhouse on the cliff above the fjord, the old warrior kept watch through the long winter night. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening from black to grey without ever showing the sun. The storm had not broken, though the wind had lessened somewhat, and the snow fell now in thick, steady sheets rather than horizontal blasts. Torvald woke stiff and cold, despite the fire, his neck protesting from the awkward angle at which he had slept on the bench. He rose carefully, feeding the fire first before checking on his unexpected guest. The woman still slept, but her color had improved significantly. The deathly pallor was gone, replaced by a healthier tone that suggested her body was recovering from its ordeal. Her breathing was deep and even, and when he touched the back of his hand to her forehead, he felt warmth, but not the burning heat of fever. She would live. That much, at least, was certain now. Torvald went about his morning routine as quietly as he could. He fed the chickens and the goat, bringing them extra grain. Grani, his old horse, nickered softly when Torvald entered the shelter, and the warrior spent a few moments stroking the animal's neck. "We have a guest," he told the horse. "A woman. I do not know her story yet, but she was running from something." Grani snorted and pushed his nose against Torvald's chest. Animals often made better listeners than people, Torvald had found. When he returned to the Longhouse, he found the woman stirring. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion evident in their dark depths as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. She looked at the timber ceiling above her, at the furs piled around her body, at the fire crackling in the hearth. Then her gaze found Torvald, and fear flashed across her face. She tried to sit up quickly, too quickly, and gasped as her body protested. Her hand went to her ribs, and Torvald saw her wince. He raised both hands slowly, palms out. "You are safe," he said, his voice deliberately low and steady. "I found you at my gate last night, half frozen. I brought you inside. No one will harm you here." The woman stared at him, her breathing rapid. Her eyes darted around the hall, taking in the details, the weapons on the walls, the size of the space, the single entrance. She was evaluating, calculating, deciding whether to believe him. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but there was strength beneath the weakness. "My home," Torvald replied. "A longhouse on the cliff above the fjord, about half a day's journey from the nearest village. My name is Torvald Eriksson. I live alone here." She processed this information, her hand still pressed against her ribs. "How long have I been here?" "Since last night. You were unconscious when I found you, and you have slept through the night and into the morning. The storm still rages outside." Something flickered across her face at that. Was it relief or disappointment? She looked down at herself, seeming to notice for the first time that her clothing had been changed. She wore one of his spare tunics now, far too large for her frame. Her hand went immediately to her throat, checking for something, and her body visibly relaxed when her fingers found the leather cord and amber pendant still in place. "You did not take it," she said softly. "It is yours." Torvald said simply, "I do not steal from those under my protection." Her eyes snapped back to his face. "Your protection? You are under my roof. By the old ways, that makes you my responsibility, until you are well enough to leave, or until you choose to go." She studied him for a long moment. Finally, she spoke again. "My name is Ragnar," she said. "Ragnar Thorsdottir, and I owe you my life." Torvald waved this away with one hand. "You owe me nothing. Any man would have done the same." "No," Ragnar said, and there was certainty in her voice now. "They would not have. Most men would have left me to die. Or worse." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Torvald did not press her for details. "Are you hungry?" he asked instead. "I can prepare broth." "Your stomach will need to ease back into food slowly," Ragnar nodded. "Broth would be welcome." "Thank you." Torvald moved to the fire and began preparing a simple bone broth, adding dried herbs and a bit of salt. As he worked, he was aware of Ragnar watching him. The silence between them was not entirely comfortable, but neither was it hostile. After a time, Ragnar spoke again. "The pendant," she said. "You noticed it?" "I did," Torvald confirmed. "It is amber carved into a bird. It was my mother's," Ragnar said quietly. "And her mother's before that. The bird is a swift. They are small but fierce, and they fly farther than almost any other bird. My grandmother said it was meant to remind us that even small things can have great strength, and that home is not a place but something you carry inside yourself. Torvald turned to look at her then, struck by the sadness in her voice. Your mother is gone? 10 winters passed, Ragnar said. Fever took her. My father followed 2 winters later. His heart, the healers said, though I think it was grief. She touched the pendant again, her fingers tracing the carved shape. This is all I have left of them. I understand, Torvald said, and meant it. He ladled broth into a wooden bowl and carried it to her. My own wife died of fever. My son drowned. My daughter went north to the Danish lands, and I have not heard from her in years. Loss is something I know well. Ragnar took the bowl with both hands, inhaling the steam. Then we are both ghosts, she said softly, living in the shadow of what was. Perhaps, Torvald allowed. Though you are young yet. I'm 32 winters, Ragnar said. Old enough to know that life rarely turns out as we plan. She sipped the broth carefully, and Torvald saw the relief in her face as the warmth spread through her body. He returned to his bench and sat down. The fire crackled between them. You were running from something, Torvald said after a while. Ragnar lowered the bowl, her expression hardening. Yes. Will they come looking for you? I do not know, she admitted. The storm may have covered my tracks, or it may simply delay them. She met his eyes directly. I will not lie to you, Torvald Eriksson. My presence here may bring danger to your door. If you wish me to leave once I am strong enough, I will understand. Torvald considered this. The sensible choice would be to send her away as soon as possible. But even as the thought formed, he knew he would not act on it. Something about this woman made him unwilling to abandon her to whatever fate awaited. You will stay until you are healed and the storm passes, he said firmly. After that we will see. But I do not turn away those who need help. Ragnar's eyes glistened. Thank you, she whispered. You're a good man. Torvald shook his head. I'm simply a man who remembers what honor means. Rest now. We will talk more when you are stronger. The first full day passed slowly, marked by the rhythm of small tasks and careful conversation. Ragnar remained weak, her body still recovering from its brush with death, but she insisted on sitting up for longer periods. Torvald saw in this a stubborn pride that reminded him of his late wife, and he respected it. By midday, the storm had finally begun to ease. The wind no longer howled with quite the same fury, and the snow fell more gently. Torvald ventured outside to check his animals and clear the doorway. When he returned, he found Ragnar examining the round shield that hung beside the entrance. This is very old, she said, her fingers hovering just above the faded paint. The style is from my grandfather's time, maybe older. It was my father's, Torvald said, and his father's before him. 3 generations. Ragnar turned to look at him. The serpents painted here. This is the old style, from before the Christ followers began changing everything. My father held to the old ways, Torvald confirmed. I keep the shield as he kept it, out of respect. It is a warrior's shield, Ragnar observed. Not decorative. These marks are from real battle. Many battles, Torvald said quietly. My father fought in the Irish lands when he was young. He gave it to me when I was 16, before my first raid. He told me that as long as I carried it, I carried the honor of our family. Ragnar was silent for a moment. And did you carry it with honor? I tried, Torvald said. I brought it home from every voyage, every battle. But honor is complicated. Sometimes keeping your word means losing everything else. She turned back to face him. You were a raider then? I was, he admitted. For 20 years. I fought, I took plunder, I survived. I was good at it. What made you stop? Torvald moved to the fire. My wife died while I was away on what would be my last voyage. When I came home wealthy with silver and found her already in the ground, I realized that all the treasure meant nothing. I put down my sword and stayed. But by then it was too late. Ragnar lowered herself back onto the bench. We all carry regrets. The question is whether we let them define us or teach us. Wise words, Torvald observed. I had little choice, Ragnar said, her hand moving to the amber pendant. My life has not been gentle. And when you are forced to rebuild yourself after loss, you learn to think carefully about who you wish to become. Torvald settled onto his bench, sensing she was ready to share more. He waited. I was married once, Ragnar began, to a man named Halfdan. He was a trader, successful and respected. When my parents died, I had nothing. Halfdan offered marriage, and I accepted. It seemed like salvation, but it was not, Torvald said gently. No, Ragnar confirmed. At first he was kind enough, but as time passed he became controlling, jealous. He did not like me speaking to other men. He did not like me having opinions that differed from his. And when I displeased him, she fell silent, her hand moving to her ribs. He hurt you, Torvald said. Regularly, Ragnar admitted. Not where others could see. He was careful, and he was powerful, well liked by the other merchants and the Jarl. Who would believe me? So you ran. I endured for 3 years, Ragnar said, her voice hardening. I saved what I could. I planned carefully. Then 5 nights ago he came home drunk and angrier than I had ever seen him. He had lost a shipment and he blamed me. He said I was cursed, that I had brought ill luck into his house. He would have killed me that night. I am certain of it. So I fought back. Torvald leaned forward. What did you do? There was a pot of hot water on the fire, Ragnar said. I threw it in his face. While he screamed, I ran. He took nothing but the clothes I wore and this pendant. I ran into the night without knowing where I was going, and he pursued you. He sent men after me, Ragnar said. I heard them calling, searching. I kept to the forest paths, moving by night. But the cold, I had not prepared for how cold it would be. Then the storm came and I lost my way. I was wondering when I saw the light from your longhouse. Torvald sat back. Your husband will not stop searching. No, Ragnar agreed. He is proud and I shamed him. He will hunt me until he finds me, or until he is certain I am dead. His reach is long. Then we ensure word does not spread, Torvald said firmly. The storm has covered your tracks. I live far from common paths. You will be safe here for now, but not forever, Ragnar said. Eventually I will need to move on. Go somewhere he cannot find me? Perhaps, Torvald allowed. But that is a decision for later when you are healed. For now, you rest. Whatever comes after, we will face it when the time arrives. Ragnar looked at him with an expression that might have been gratitude or wonder. Why are you helping me? She asked. You do not know me. You could send me away and return to your solitude. Torvald considered the question. I have lived alone for a long time, he said finally. I thought it was what I wanted, what I deserved. But perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps fate brought you to my door because we both needed something to fight for again. You needed protection, and I needed a reason to care whether the sun rises tomorrow. The fire crackled between them. Ragnar's eyes were bright with emotion, but she blinked it away and nodded once. They sat together in companionable quiet as afternoon faded toward evening. 2 damaged souls, finding unexpected shelter in each other's presence. 3 days passed, and with them the worst of the storm. The world outside transformed into a landscape of pristine white, snow piled high against the walls. The fjord below was frozen at its edges, dark water visible only at its center, where the current still moved. The sky remained heavy with clouds, but the wind had died, and the temperature no longer carried the killing edge it had possessed the night Ragnar arrived. She grew stronger each day. Color returned to her cheeks, and the trembling that had seized her body gradually subsided. She moved with more confidence, though Torvald noticed she still favored her left side, where the bruising was deepest. She insisted on helping with small tasks, mending his clothes, stirring the pot while he prepared meals, feeding the chickens. It was during one of these quiet moments that Torvald noticed something he had missed before. Ragnar moved through the longhouse with an awareness that went beyond simple caution. Her eyes tracked every sound, every shift in the wind outside. She positioned herself so she could always see the door. When Torvald moved suddenly, he saw her body tense, ready to flee or fight. These were patterns worn into her very being by years of vigilance. You lived with fear for a long time, Torvald observed one evening as they sat by the fire. Ragnar looked up from the sock she was darning. Yes, she said simply. You learned to read the signs. The sound of his footsteps told me what mood he was in. The way he closed the door told me whether I should make myself scarce. You learn to become invisible when necessary. You learn how to apologize for things that were not your fault. That is no way to live, Torvald said, anger stirring in his chest. No, Ragnar agreed, but it was survival. And I am a survivor, Torvald. I may not be a warrior like you, but I have fought my own battles. I'm still here. That counts for something. It counts for everything, Torvald said firmly. Courage is not only found on the battlefield. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is continue living when everything in them wants to give up. She met his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition, an understanding. On the fourth day, Torvald decided it was time to check his traps in the forest. The snow had stopped falling, and he needed fresh meat. He told Ragnar his plan over breakfast, and saw the flash of fear in her eyes. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. "A few hours, no more," Torvald said. "I should be back before midday." Ragnar nodded, but her hand had moved to the amber pendant, her fingers working over the carved bird. He rose and went to the wall, where bitter steel hung. He took down the sword, removed it from its scabbard, and checked the blade. Still sharp, still ready. He brought it to Ragnar and held it out. She stared at the weapon. I do not know how to use a sword." "You do not need technique," Torvald said. "If someone comes through that door who is not me, you hold this with both hands, and you swing it with everything you have. The blade is heavy enough to do damage even without skill. Do you understand?" Ragnar took the sword reluctantly, her hands wrapping around the grip. The weapon was too large for her, but Torvald saw determination settle over her fear. "I understand," she said. "Bar the door after I leave," Torvald instructed. "Do not open it for anyone but me. I will knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That will be our signal." He went to his chest and pulled out an old hunting knife. This he belted at his waist. Then he pulled on his heaviest cloak and fur cap. Before he left, he paused and looked back at Ragnar. She stood by the fire. Bitter steel held awkwardly in her hands, her face pale but resolute. "I will return," he said. "You have my word." "Be careful," Ragnar replied, and the concern in her voice was genuine. Torvald stepped out into the cold. He heard the bar slide into place behind him. Good. The world outside was almost painfully bright, the sun finally breaking through and reflecting off endless white. The snow came up past his knees in places, and he was grateful for the trail he had broken before the storm. His traps were scattered through the woods that climbed the hillside. The first trap was empty. The second held a hare, frozen solid. The third trap revealed something that made Torvald stop and kneel in the snow. The trap had been disturbed, but not by an animal. The mechanism had been carefully dismantled, the pieces laid out in the snow. And there, clear in the fresh snow, were boot prints. Human boot prints made by someone wearing good leather boots with iron hobnails in the soles. Someone had been here, recently. Within the last day, judging by how little snow had filled the impressions. Torvald stood slowly, his hand moving to the hunting knife. He scanned the forest around him, looking for movement, listening for sounds that did not belong. The woods were silent except for the occasional shift of snow falling from branches. He followed the boot prints with his eyes. They came from the south, from the direction of Orm's farmstead and the village beyond. They circled his trap, paused there, then moved on, heading north and west, toward his Longhouse. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Someone had been scouting his land, someone looking for something, or someone. Torvald abandoned his remaining traps and began moving back toward the Longhouse, pushing through the snow with renewed urgency. The prints had been made yesterday, which meant whoever left them was likely long gone. But it also meant that Ragnar's pursuers were closer than either of them had hoped. His mind raced as he walked. These were not common travelers. These were men who knew how to move through winter terrain, who took the time to understand the land they crossed. Hunters, trackers, men sent by someone with resources and determination, men sent by Halfdan. Torvald reached the Longhouse breathing hard, his lungs burning from the cold air and the pace he had set. He gave the signal, 3 knocks, pause, 2 more, and heard Ragnar moving inside. The bar lifted and the door opened just enough for him to slip through. "What happened?" she asked immediately, reading the tension in his face. Torvald shed his cloak and moved to the fire. "Someone has been watching the area," he said. "I found boot prints near one of my traps. Fresh prints made within the last day. They came from the south and moved toward the coast." "Toward here?" Ragnar's face went pale. She still held bitter steel, and now her grip tightened until her knuckles showed white. "They found me," she whispered. "We do not know that for certain," Torvald said, though he believed it was true. "No," Ragnar said, shaking her head. "You do not believe that any more than I do. They are searching for me. They will come here." Torvald could not argue with her logic. "Then we prepare," he said, his voice steady. "If they come, we will be ready." He took bitter steel from Ragnar's trembling hands and returned it to the wall, then began moving through the longhouse with purpose. He checked the bar on the door, ensuring it was solid. He examined the shutters on the 2 small windows. He inventoried his weapons, the sword, his hunting knife, a hand axe, and a spear. Ragnar watched him work, her fear gradually giving way to determination. "I have brought this upon you," she said quietly. "I should leave. Draw them away from your home." "No," Torvald said flatly. "You would last perhaps a day in this cold, and they would find you by nightfall. At least here we have walls and weapons." "But you could be hurt," Ragnar protested. "Or killed. Because of me. I could also slip on ice and break my neck," Torvald said. "Or choke on a fishbone. Death finds us all eventually. The question is not whether we die, but whether we live with honor first. I will not send you away to save myself." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me move supplies closer to the door," Torvald said. "If we are forced to defend this place, I want everything we might need within reach. And there is something else I need to show you." He led her to the far end of the longhouse, behind the hanging curtain. There, set into the floor and hidden beneath a worn fur rug, was a wooden trapdoor. "I built this years ago," Torvald explained, kneeling to lift the door. "After my family died, I became careful. I thought that if raiders ever came, or if I needed to hide supplies from thieves, it would be useful." The trapdoor opened to reveal a space beneath the floor, perhaps 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, with enough height for a person to crouch comfortably. A ladder led down into the darkness. "If men come, and they are too many for me to fight," Torvald said, his voice grave, "you will go down here. You will hide, and you will stay hidden no matter what you hear above. Do you understand?" Ragnar looked at the hiding space, then back at Torvald. "And leave you to face them alone?" "No, if they come, I will fight beside you." "You do not know how to fight," Torvald said. "Then teach me," Ragnar insisted. "I'm tired of running and hiding. I'm tired of being a victim. If Halfdan's men come for me, I want to stand on my own feet and face them." Torvald saw the fire in her eyes and recognized it, the same determination that had driven him through decades of battle. It was a quality that could not be taught, only discovered within oneself. "Very well," he said. "I will show you what I can. But first we eat and rest. The tracks I saw were old enough that whoever made them has moved on for now. We have time to prepare." They spent the rest of the day in careful preparation. Torvald moved pots of water near the door, along with strips of dried meat and flatbread. He laid out bandages and a clay jar of honey for wounds. He positioned weapons at strategic points, the spear near the door, the hand axe by the window, the hunting knife within reach of the fire. As evening approached, he took Ragnar outside into the cleared space before the longhouse. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. The cold was brutal, but he wanted her to understand fighting in the conditions they would face. He handed her the hand axe. "The most important thing is not technique," he told her. "It is commitment. If you swing a weapon, you swing it to do harm. Hesitation will get you killed." He showed her how to hold the axe, how to use her body weight rather than just arm strength, how to aim for vulnerable points. He demonstrated defensive stances, how to keep her balance on snow and ice. Ragnar practiced the movements awkwardly at first, but with increasing confidence. She was not strong, but she was quick. More importantly, she listened carefully and applied what he taught her without questioning every instruction. "If it comes to fighting," Torvald said, as darkness fell and they returned inside, "remember that surprise is your greatest weapon. They will expect a man alone or a frightened woman. They will not expect you to attack. Use that." "I will," Ragnar promised. She set the hand axe beside her sleeping place, within easy reach. "Thank you, Torvald. For everything. You are worth protecting," Torvald said simply. "Do not doubt that." That night they sat by the fire longer than usual, neither quite ready to seek sleep. Torvald found himself studying Ragnar's profile in the firelight, the strong line of her jaw, the determined set of her mouth. She was beautiful, he realized, though that was not what drew him to her. It was her resilience, her refusal to be broken. "What will you do?" he asked quietly. "After this is over, assuming we survive. What kind of life do you want?" Ragnar was silent for a long time. "I do not know," she admitted finally. "I have spent so long just trying to survive that I forgot to imagine what comes after survival." She turned to look at him. "What about you?" Torvald considered the question. A week ago, he would have said he wanted nothing, but something had shifted. "I would choose to matter again," he said slowly. "To have a purpose beyond just existing. To protect someone who needs protecting." He paused, then added with careful honesty, "To not be alone anymore." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of possibility, of connection, of a future that might exist beyond mere survival. 2 more days passed in tense preparation. Torvald and Ragnar fell into a rhythm of watchfulness, taking turns sleeping while the other kept vigil. They spoke less now, both aware that words felt inadequate against the weight of what might be coming. The waiting was its own form of torture. Every sound outside brought them both to alertness. On the morning of the 3rd day, Torvald was checking the perimeter when he saw a figure approaching from the south. His hand went immediately to his knife, but as the figure drew closer, he recognized the gait and build. It was Orm, his neighbor, trudging through the snow. Torvald felt relief war with concern. Orm was a good man, but his presence meant word might spread about Ragnar. "Orm," Torvald called out in greeting, "you are far from home in this cold." Orm's face was red from exertion, his beard crusted with ice. "Torvald," he panted, "I came to bring warning. There are men in the area, strangers. They came to my farmstead 2 days ago asking questions." Torvald's blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" "They were looking for a woman," Orm said, glancing toward the Longhouse. "Dark-haired, traveling alone. They claimed she was a runaway slave, property of a merchant from the south. They offered silver for information." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," Orm said firmly. "I told them I had seen no one. My wife said the same. But Torvald, these were not honest men. They had the look of killers about them." He paused. "Is she here?" "The woman they seek." Torvald considered lying, but Orm deserved better. "She is," he admitted. "But she is no slave. She is a woman fleeing an abusive husband. The merchant they spoke of, he beat her, would have killed her. She ran to save her life." Orm nodded slowly, unsurprised. "I thought as much." "The story did not sit right." "How many?" Torvald asked. "4 that I saw," Orm replied. "But there may be more. They had the look of men who work together, who know their trade. 4 armed men." Torvald's mind worked through the mathematics of it. 4 against 1 was terrible odds, even for a warrior in his prime. At his age, with years of rust on his skills, it would be nearly impossible. "They will come here," Torvald said. "If they are thorough, they will check every dwelling within a day's travel." "Yes," Orm agreed. He hesitated. "I could bring men from my farmstead, my 2 older sons, and my brother. We could help you defend—" "No," Torvald cut him off gently but firmly. "I will not ask you to risk your family for this. You have done enough by bringing warning. Go home, Orm. Keep your family safe." Orm looked torn, his sense of honor clearly at war with his duty. "You are certain?" "I am," Torvald said. "But I thank you, my friend." After Orm departed, Torvald returned to the Longhouse and told Ragnar everything. She listened with growing distress. 4 men, she whispered. "Halfdan sent 4 men to bring me back. or to kill me, or fear what you represent, Torvald said. You defied him. You escaped. If word spreads, it damages his reputation. Men like him cannot afford to appear weak. We should run, Ragnar said, though her voice lacked conviction. We would be caught within hours, Torvald said. 4 men, traveling light against 2 people with limited supplies in deep snow. They would hunt us down easily. No, our best chance is here, where I know the ground and we have walls. The day wore on with agonizing slowness. Torvald made final preparations, positioning weapons, checking the door bar, ensuring they had water and food close at hand. As evening approached, he built up the fire higher than usual. It was full dark when Ragnar, watching from the window, suddenly stiffened. Torvald, she said quietly. There are lights, torches, moving toward us from the tree line. Torvald moved to her side and looked out. He counted 4 points of flickering light spread out in a line. 4 torches, 4 men. They were not even attempting stealth. They expected no real resistance. Get the hand axe, Torvald said, his voice calm, despite the adrenaline flowing through his veins. Position yourself to the left of the door, where you will be hidden when it opens. Do not act until I tell you, but be ready. Ragnar obeyed, moving with surprising steadiness. Torvald took down bitter steel and drew the blade from its scabbard. The sword felt heavy in his hands, heavier than he remembered, but the weight was familiar, almost comforting. The torches drew closer. Torvald could make out figures now, 4 men, all large and well-armed. They moved with the confidence of professionals. They stopped perhaps 20 paces from the door, and one stepped forward. Torvald Eriksson, the man called out. We mean you no harm. We seek only a woman who has taken refuge in these lands, a criminal who fled justice. If you shelter her, you are required by law to turn her over to us. Torvald did not respond immediately. He was studying the men, noting their positions, the way they held their weapons. The speaker carried a sword and wore good armor. The others had axes and spears. All looked comfortable with their weapons. These were men who killed for silver. I shelter no criminals, Torvald called back finally. Only those who seek honest protection. Then you admit she is here, the man said, satisfaction in his voice. Make this easy, old man. Send her out, and we will leave you in peace. Refuse, and we will take her anyway. And you will die in the process. I have a question first, Torvald said. The merchant who sent you, Halfdan, what will he do with her when you bring her back? The man laughed, a cold sound without humor. What do you think he will do? She scarred him, humiliated him. He will make an example of her. But that is not your concern. Your concern is saving your own life. I see, Torvald said. He had known the answer, but hearing it spoken aloud clarified everything. These men would not be reasoned with or bought off. They had a job to do, and they would do it or die trying. He turned to look at Ragnar, standing ready with the hand axe, her face pale but determined. In her eyes he saw fear, but also trust. She believed he would protect her. Something in his chest tightened at that realization. Whatever happens, he said softly, you do not let them take you. You fight until you cannot fight anymore, and then you use the hiding place. You survive this, Ragnar. You survive and you live free. Torvald, she began, but he shook his head. Swear it, he insisted. I swear, she whispered. Then, surprising him, she stepped close and kissed his cheek. Thank you for giving me hope again. Before Torvald could respond, the voice outside called again. We are done talking, old man. Send her out now, or we come in. Torvald turned back to the door. His hands tightened on Bittersteel's grip. He had faced death many times, but never had the stakes felt quite so clear. This was not about plunder or glory or survival. This was about protecting someone who mattered. Then come, Torvald said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of battle. But know this, I am Torvald Eriksson, son of Eric the Red-Handed, bearer of Bittersteel and the shield of my fathers. I have stood against Saxon shield walls and Irish warriors. I have sailed through storms that drowned greater men than you. And I do not yield. There was a moment of silence outside. Then the man laughed again, but this time it sounded less certain. You are brave, old man, but bravery will not save you. Perhaps not, Torvald agreed. But it will make you pay dearly for what you take." The torches began to move forward again, and Torvald braced himself. All that mattered was the next few moments. All that mattered was the woman standing beside him, depending on him to stand between her and the darkness. And stand he would. Until his last breath, he would stand. The four men spread out as they approached, their torches casting wild shadows across the snow. Torvald watched them through the narrow gap in the shutter, his warrior's eye noting how they moved. Coordinated, but not perfectly synchronized. Experienced, but not veterans of countless battles. They were dangerous, but not invincible. The leader raised his hand and the others stopped. He planted his torch in the snow, then drew his sword. The blade caught the firelight, well-maintained and sharp. The other three did the same with their weapons. "This is your last chance, old man," the leader called. "Open the door and send her out. We will take her and leave." "No one needs to die tonight." Torvald said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence could be its own form of weapon, that sometimes the most unnerving thing you could do was refuse to engage. The leader waited perhaps 30 heartbeats, then shrugged. "So be it, you chose this," he gestured to the others. Two moved toward the door, while another circled around to the side of the Longhouse, presumably to watch for escape attempts. The strategy was sound. They were taking no chances. Torvald stepped back from the shutter and moved to his position beside the door. He caught Ragnar's eye and gave her a small nod. She returned it, her jaw set with determination. The first blow against the door came hard and heavy, someone with an axe trying to split the wood. But Torvald had built this door himself, using oak he had seasoned for 2 full years. The door shuddered but held. Another blow came, and another. Wood chips began to fly from the inside face. "They will break through eventually," Ragnar said quietly. "Yes," Torvald agreed, "but it will take time. And time is what we need." He was counting the blows, estimating how long the door would hold. 10 more strikes, perhaps 12. He used the time to center himself, to let his breathing slow and deepen, to find that calm place inside that he had learned to access before battle. Fear was there, but also something else. A clarity, a sharpness of mind that came only when death was near. The memories came unbidden. He remembered standing in a shield wall as a young man, the warrior beside him screaming in terror as Saxon spears came down like rain. He remembered his first kill, the shock of how easily a blade could part flesh. He remembered the raid, where his shield brother had died in his arms, and the promise Torvald had made to carry the man's memory home. He had survived all of it. He had survived because he was careful and lucky and willing to do what others would not. But more than that, he had survived because he fought for something, for his crew, for his family, for silver that would keep his children fed. And now he fought for Ragnar, for the woman who had stumbled into his life and reminded him what it meant to care, to protect, to matter. If this was to be his last battle, at least it would be for a reason worth dying for. The door splintered. A section near the bar gave way, opening a gap the size of a man's head. Through it, Torvald could see the face of one of the attackers, lit by torchlight, grinning with anticipation. The man raised his axe for another blow. Torvald moved before the blow could fall. He thrust bitter steel through the gap, aiming for the man's weapon arm. The blade caught the attacker across the forearm, cutting through leather and flesh. The man screamed and fell back, his axe dropping into the snow. "First blood to us," Torvald said calmly. The leader's voice came from outside, sharp with anger. "Careful, you fools! He still has teeth." The attackers adjusted their approach. Rather than trying to hack through the door, they began working on the hinges, which were on the outside and more vulnerable. It was a smarter strategy, and Torvald cursed himself for not anticipating it. "When they come through," Torvald said to Ragnar, keeping his voice low, "they will expect me at the door. They will not expect you behind them. When I give the signal, when I shout your name, you strike. Not at the first man through, but at the second. Aim for the back of his knees. Take him down, then retreat to the far end of the hall. Do you understand?" "Yes," Ragnar said, her voice steady. "I understand. Good," Torvald said. Then, surprising himself, he added, "You are brave, Ragnar Thorsdottir. Braver than many warriors I have known." She met his eyes. "And you are kind, Torvald Eriksson. Kinder than any man I have known. Whatever happens tonight, I am grateful for these days. For the first time in years, I have felt safe. You gave me that." The words struck something deep in Torvald's chest, but there was no time to examine the feeling. The sound of metal on metal rang out. They had broken one of the hinges. The door sagged inward slightly. Torvald positioned himself 3 paces back from the door, bitter steel held in both hands in a guard position his father had taught him 40 years ago. From this position, he could strike in any direction. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath years of disuse, but not forgotten. The second hinge broke with a screech of torn metal. The door fell inward, still held by the bar, but now at an angle that created a gap wide enough for a man to squeeze through. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The attackers were cautious now, respectful of the old warrior who had already drawn blood. Then the leader's voice cut through the night. "Together!" All at once. Overwhelm him. It was the right call. Against multiple attackers coming from different angles, even the best warrior struggled. Torvald braced himself. The first man came through the gap, low and fast, his sword leading. Torvald swept Bittersteel down in a diagonal cut that caught the blade and forced it wide, then followed with a kick to the man's chest that sent him sprawling back. But even as he recovered, the second attacker was coming through high, and a third was working to lift the bar. Everything slowed down in the way it always did in combat. Torvald saw every detail with preternatural clarity. The way the second attacker's weight was too far forward, the opening in his guard near his left hip. Bittersteel moved, as if guided by someone else's hand, sliding past the man's hasty parry and biting deep into his side. The attacker gasped and staggered, blood darkening his tunic, but there was no time to finish him. The third man had lifted the bar and was pushing through, and the first attacker was back on his feet. Torvald retreated 2 steps, trying to maintain space. His shoulders came up against the wall. He had run out of room. The first attacker lunged. Torvald parried, but the angle was awkward, his leverage poor. The force of the blow sent shockwaves up his arms. He was strong still, but not as strong as he had been. In the prolonged fight, they would wear him down. The third man was through now, circling to Torvald's right. The leader would be coming through any moment. This was the critical point. If he let them surround him, he was finished. He needed to create chaos. "Ragnar!" Torvald shouted. "Now!" He saw her move in his peripheral vision, a flash of motion from the left side. The hand axe came down in a vicious arc, catching the third attacker behind the knee, just as Torvald had instructed. The man screamed and collapsed, his leg buckling. Ragnar did not try for a second strike. She was already retreating as instructed. The distraction was enough. Torvald surged forward, driving Bittersteel toward the first attacker. The man got his sword up to parry, but Torvald was driving him back toward the door, back into the gap where the leader was trying to enter. The 2 attackers collided, tangling briefly. Torvald used the moment to reassess. One man down with a leg wound. One man wounded in the side, still dangerous but slowed. 2 men still fresh, the first attacker and the leader. Better odds than a moment ago, but still not good. His breath was coming harder now. His arms ached from the impacts. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold. He was not the warrior he had been at 20 or 30. His body was reminding him of that with every movement, but he was not finished yet. Not while he still drew breath. Not while Ragnar depended on him. The leader finally pushed through the door, his face a mask of controlled anger. This one was different from the others, calmer, more measured. A true professional. He took in the scene with a quick glance, then focused entirely on Torvald. "You are good, old man," the leader said, beginning to circle. "Better than I expected. But you are tired already, and we have barely begun. This ends only one way." "Perhaps," Torvald said, matching the man's movement. "But perhaps not the way you think," the leader smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Brave words. Let us see if your sword is as sharp as your tongue," he attacked. The leader was fast, faster than Torvald had anticipated. The first strike came in a blur of steel aimed at Torvald's shoulder, a probing attack meant to test his defenses. Torvald parried barely, the impact rattling his arms. The leader did not pause. He pressed forward with a combination of cuts and thrusts that forced Torvald to give ground, to focus entirely on defense. This was a different level of opponent. The other men had been competent, dangerous in their own right, but this one was a master of his craft. Every movement was economical, purposeful. There was no wasted motion, no openings that were not deliberate traps. And he was reading Torvald with every exchange, learning his patterns, identifying his weaknesses. Torvald's heel caught on something, the body of the man Ragnar had brought down, and he stumbled. The leader's eyes lit up with triumph. He lunged, going for the kill, but Torvald's stumble had not been entirely accidental. Years of experience had taught him to use every advantage, even momentary loss of balance. As he fell backward, he brought bitter steel up in a rising cut that caught the leader's extended sword arm. The blade bit shallow, drawing blood but not disabling. Torvald rolled to the side and came up to one knee. The leader had pulled back, reassessing, a line of red showing through his sleeve. The man's eyes had gone cold and calculating. He was no longer playing with his prey. Now he meant to end this quickly. Impressive, the leader said. But tricks will not save you. He came again, and this time he was not alone. The first attacker, emboldened by his leader's presence, was moving to flank Torvald from the left. Even wounded, he was dangerous. 2 against 1, and Torvald was already tired from the previous exchanges. Torvald backed toward the hearth, using the space and the fire to limit their approach angles. He could not let them get on both sides of him. The heat of the flames was intense at his back, but it also provided illumination and made the attackers more cautious about their footing. The leader feinted left, then attacked right. Torvald parried, but had to pivot quickly to meet the first attacker coming from the other side. Bitter steel caught the man's sword with a ringing clash. For a moment, the three of them were locked in a deadly dance around the fire, each seeking advantage, each denying it to the others. Torvald's breathing was ragged now. His shoulders burned with fatigue. Every parry cost him more than it cost his younger opponents. He was giving ground steadily, being pushed back toward the wall again. Once his back was against timber, they would overwhelm him. From the corner of his eye, he saw Ragnar. She had positioned herself at the far end of the hall as instructed, but she was not cowering. She was watching, her hand still gripping the hand-axe, her eyes tracking the fight with fierce intensity, waiting for a chance to help, to strike again if the opportunity presented itself. The leader saw Torvald's glance and smiled cruelly. "Worried about your woman, old man? Do not be. When you are dead, we will take very good care of her." The words were meant to anger him, to make him reckless. And they worked. Rage flared hot in Torvald's chest, not the mindless fury of youth, but something colder and more focused. This man would not touch Ragnar, would not take her back to Halfdan, would not harm another living soul if Torvald had any strength left to prevent it. He stopped retreating, planted his feet, and attacked. The sudden reversal caught both men off guard. Torvald drove forward with a series of powerful overhead cuts that forced them to defend rather than press their advantage. He was no longer trying to conserve energy or fight defensively. He was spending everything he had left, gambling that he could break through before his strength gave out entirely. Bitter steel sang through the air. The blade, lovingly maintained over decades, proved its worth. One of Torvald's strikes beat aside the first attacker's guard and opened a deep cut across the man's chest. The attacker gasped and fell to his knees, his sword clattering to the floor, but the effort had cost Torvald. His arms felt like lead. His vision was narrowing at the edges. The leader, seeing his moment, launched a vicious counterattack that drove Torvald back against the wall. "You fought well," the leader said, raising his sword for the killing blow. "But it is over." The blade came down. Torvald tried to parry, but his arms were too slow, too heavy. The leader's sword slid past his guard and bit deep into his left shoulder. Pain exploded through Torvald's body, white hot and overwhelming. He felt his knees buckle. Bitter steel fell from his nerveless fingers and rang against the stone floor. The leader stepped back, breathing hard but victorious. "Stay down, old man. Accept your fate with dignity." But Torvald was not looking at his killer. He was looking past him, to where Ragnar stood. Their eyes met across the length of the hall. In her face, he saw fear and grief and desperate determination. And something else, something that gave him strength when he thought he had none left. He saw love. The realization struck him as powerfully as any blade. In these few days, in this strange and desperate situation, they had found something neither had expected. They had found each other, and he would be damned if he let it end here. Torvald's hand moved to his belt, to the hunting knife he had forgotten in the fury of sword work. His fingers closed around the familiar grip. The leader saw the movement. His eyes widened fractionally as he realized his mistake. He had assumed the fight was over, had let his guard drop for just a heartbeat. That heartbeat was all Torvald needed. Torvald surged up from his knees with the last of his strength, the hunting knife leading. The leader tried to bring his sword around to parry, but he was too close, his weapon too long for the distance. The knife punched through leather and cloth and found the soft flesh beneath the ribs. The leader's mouth opened in shock. His sword fell from nerveless fingers. Torvald twisted the blade, then withdrew it, and the leader collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Torvald stood swaying, his vision swimming. The pain in his shoulder was immense, radiating down his arm and up into his neck. He could feel warm blood soaking through his tunic, running down his side. Too much blood. He had seen enough wounds to know this one was serious, but the fight was over. 4 men had come to take Ragnar, and all 4 lay on the floor of his longhouse, too dead, too wounded, too badly to pose further threat. They had failed. She was safe. The realization brought a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened to him now, he had succeeded in what mattered. He had protected her. He had stood between her and those who would harm her, and he had not yielded. His father would have been proud. Torvald! Ragnar's voice cut through the fog of pain and exhaustion. She was suddenly beside him, her hands on his good arm, supporting him. "Sit down. Let me see the wound." He let her guide him to the bench by the fire. His legs were no longer obeying him properly anyway. He sat heavily, his head spinning, while Ragnar knelt beside him and began carefully removing his tunic to expose the injury. Her sharp intake of breath told him what he already knew. It was bad. The leader's sword had cut deep into the meat of his shoulder, possibly nicking bone. The bleeding was heavy despite the cold that should have helped slow it. "Stay with me," Ragnar said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I need to stop the bleeding. This will hurt." She moved with surprising efficiency, tearing cloth into strips for bandages, heating water, adding honey to help prevent festering. Her hands were steady as she cleaned the wound, though he saw tears streaming down her face. She packed the injury with clean cloth and bound it tightly, using pressure to slow the bleeding. Torvald watched her work through a haze of pain. "You know medicine," he observed, his voice weak. "My mother was a healer," Ragnar said, not looking up from her work. "She taught me what she could before she died. I never thought I would need to use it like this." She tied off the bandage and finally met his eyes. "The wound is deep, Torvald. You have lost much blood. You need rest and time to heal." "We do not have time," Torvald said. "There may be more men coming. We need to—" "No," Ragnar interrupted firmly. "There are no more men coming. Not tonight. And if they come tomorrow or the day after, we will deal with it then. Right now you need to rest." She helped him lie back on the bench, positioning furs beneath his head. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through his shoulder, but once he was settled, the agony dulled to a steady throb. Exhaustion pulled at him like a tide, threatening to drag him under. "The bodies," he murmured, "need to move them outside. Before they—" "I will handle it," Ragnar said. "I am stronger than I look, and the cold will help preserve them until we can bury them properly. Rest now, Torvald. You have done enough." He wanted to argue, but his eyes were already closing. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Ragnar's face above his own. her expression fierce with determination and something deeper, that same emotion he had seen in her eyes during the battle, love against all odds. In the midst of violence and fear, they had found love. When Torvald woke, pale morning light was filtering through the damaged door. His shoulder was a mass of pain, but his mind was clearer. He turned his head carefully and saw that the bodies had indeed been moved outside. He could see them through the gap in the door, arranged in the snow. Ragnar must have worked through the night. She was sitting beside him now, dozing in the chair she had pulled close to his bench. The hand axe lay across her lap, ready even in sleep. Her face was pale with exhaustion, dark circles under her eyes, but there was peace in her expression that he had not seen before. Torvald reached out with his good hand and gently touched her arm. She woke instantly, alert, her hand going to the axe before she recognized him. "You are awake," she said, relief flooding her features. "How do you feel?" "Like I was run through with a sword," Torvald said, attempting a weak smile. "But alive. Thanks to you." "Thanks to us both," Ragnar corrected. She set aside the axe and took his hand in both of hers. "We survived, Torvald." "Together we survived?" "Yes," he agreed. "Together?" For a long moment they simply sat in silence, hands clasped, two people who had faced death and emerged on the other side. The Longhouse was damaged, Torvald was wounded, and there would be consequences to deal with. But those were problems for later. Right now, in this moment, they were alive. They were free, and they were together. That was enough. 3 weeks passed before Torvald could use his left arm without wincing. The wound healed slowly, as deep wounds do, but Ragnar's careful tending kept the festering at bay. She changed his bandages daily, applied fresh honey, and made him drink bitter teas that she claimed would strengthen his blood. He grumbled about the taste, but drank them obediently, recognizing that her knowledge had saved his life as surely as his sword had saved hers. During those weeks of recovery, something shifted between them. The immediate danger had passed, but neither spoke of Ragnar leaving. The question hung unasked in the air, growing more comfortable with each passing day, until it ceased to feel like a question at all. She belonged here now. They both knew it, even if the words remained unspoken. Orm came to visit on the 4th day after the battle, bringing his 2 eldest sons. They helped repair the door and the broken hinges, working efficiently while asking no questions about the bodies that Torvald and Ragnar had buried in the frozen ground behind the Longhouse. Orm was not a foolish man. He understood what had happened, and he understood that some things were better left unsaid. The men who were asking questions have not returned, Orm mentioned casually as they fitted the repaired door back into place. Word in the village is that they moved on to the north, still searching. No one has seen them since. Good, Torvald said simply. The lie would hold. 4 men had come seeking a runaway woman and had simply disappeared into the wilderness. Such things happened in winter. The land was harsh and unforgiving, and not all who ventured into it returned, as winter slowly released its grip and the first hints of spring began to show. Longer days, slightly warmer winds, the ice on the fjord beginning to crack and shift. Torvald found himself thinking about the future with a clarity he had not possessed in years. He was healing, yes, but he was also changing. The man who had lived alone in quiet despair was gone, replaced by someone who had purpose again, who had reason to wake each morning with something other than simple habit driving him forward. Ragnar changed too. The wariness that had defined her movements when she first arrived had faded. She moved through the Longhouse with confidence now, with ownership. She reorganized his stores, mended his clothes properly rather than just patching them, added her own touches to the space, a clay pot with early spring flowers, a better arrangement of the cooking implements. Small improvements that made the place feel less like a warrior's barracks and more like a home. One evening, as they sat by the fire after their meal, Ragnar spoke the words they had both been avoiding. "I should think about where I will go," she said quietly, not looking at him. "When the weather fully clears, when you are completely healed." Torvald was silent for a long moment. His hand moved unconsciously to his shoulder, feeling the scar through his tunic. "Is that what you want?" he asked finally. "To leave?" "No," Ragnar admitted, and now she did meet his eyes. "But I do not want to presume. You saved my life, you gave me shelter, but that does not mean you want me here permanently. You have lived alone for so long. I do not want to be a burden or an obligation." "A burden," Torvald repeated, tasting the word. Then he shook his head slowly. "Ragnar, in the time you have been here, I have felt more alive than I have in 15 years. Since you arrived, I have had reason to plan beyond the next day, to think about seasons other than the one I am in, to care about something more than simple survival. That is not a burden. That is a gift." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. "Then you want me to stay?" "I want you to stay," Torvald confirmed. "Not because you owe me anything, and not because you have nowhere else to go, but because—" he paused, searching for words adequate to the feeling. "Because when I look at the future now, I see you in it. I see us working together, building something, maybe even finding happiness. If you want that too." "I do," Ragnar said, and her voice was steady with certainty. "I want that more than I have wanted anything in a very long time." They sat in comfortable silence, hands finding each other across the space between them. Outside, the wind carried the smell of the sea and the promise of spring. Inside, the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows on the walls, where bitter steel and the family shield hung side by side. Reminders of the past, but no longer the only things that defined this place. "There will be talk," Ragnar said eventually. "When people learn I am here, a woman with no family, living with an unmarried man. They will assume things. Let them assume," Torvald said. "We know the truth of it. That is enough." Then, after a moment, he added with careful casualness, "Though if you wish to make it more than an assumption, I would not object. When you are ready, if you are ready." Ragnar turned to look at him fully, her expression thoughtful. "Are you asking me to marry you, Torvald Eriksson?" "I suppose I am," Torvald said, feeling suddenly uncertain in a way he had not felt even facing 4 armed men. "I know I'm old and scarred and set in my ways. I know I cannot offer you wealth or easy living, but I can offer you safety and partnership and—" he hesitated, then spoke the truth plainly. "And love, if you will have it." Tears spilled down Ragnar's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. To you, to this life, to building something new from the ashes of what we lost. Yes, Torvald, I will marry you." He pulled her close with his good arm, mindful of his healing shoulder, and she came willingly, resting her head against his chest. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers, neither feeling the need to speak further. Everything that needed saying had been said. When summer came, they would be married in the simple way of the old customs, with Orm and his family as witnesses. Ragnar would wear her mother's amber pendant, and Torvald would give her a ring he would forge himself from silver he had saved. They would build a life together on the cliff above the fjord, 2 people who had survived the worst and found, against all odds, the best. But that was the future. For now, in this moment, they simply held each other and listened to the wind outside, grateful for the chance they had been given, grateful for the kindness of fate that had brought a desperate woman to a lonely warrior's gate on a frozen winter night. Sometimes, Torvald reflected, the greatest battles are not won with swords, but with the simple courage to let someone in, to risk caring again, to choose hope over despair. He had fought many battles in his life, but this, opening his heart after years of keeping it closed, had been the hardest and most important of all. And he had won. They both had. The fire burned low. The night deepened. And in the Longhouse on the cliff, 2 souls who had been lost found their way home at last.